We begin with the 1978 Chrysler New Yorker Brougham 4-door, which cost around $8,000. The New Yorker was around for a while, dating as far back as 1940 and lasting until 1996, and essentially this was one of Chrysler's most prestigious vehicles throughout its lifetime. In this case, I will be referring to the model years 1974 to 1978, aka the Series 4C New Yorker. They were beyond smooth thanks to its unibody construction and front torsion bar suspension setup, along with having those giant fluffy seats. Of course, these feature those beautiful concealed headlamps, deluxe wheel covers, power windows, shag carpeting. These were pretty loaded. And speaking of that, as I mentioned earlier, there were a whole bunch of added options that can easily drive the price up a few $1,000s in today's money. One special trim that I came across was the St. Regis package. These had those infamous opera windows in a padded white canopy vinyl roof, along with white interior and either black or gold accent trim. These came standard with a 400 and consumers could option in for the 440. California and high altitude regions came standard with a 360. And speaking of California and rules and regulations, these full-size boats were introduced almost simultaneously during the 1973 oil embargo, and that would heavily influence the New Yorker name for years to come. Next is the Oldsmobile Tornado Brougham. I'm just kidding, it's the Oldsmobile Tornado Brougham, coming at around $11,000. If you know anything about GM, you would know that these were on the same platform as the Riviera and Eldorado. That being said, I'm not going to have those other E-platform cars on this list. To me, that just seems lazy, and so I decided to go with the Olds variant, as we will see a lot more from Cadillac, and I prefer the Tornado to the Riviera. So the Tornado was this front-wheel drive personal luxury coupe, and come 1979, they completely changed. Looking at the second generation to the third, you can see what I'm talking about. They lost almost 1,000 pounds and drastically shrunk in length. However, these were still pretty comfortable. They featured an independent rear suspension that was taken from Cadillac, which allowed for a much better ride than its predecessor. Of course, these feature some very comfortable looking seats, 6-way driver's power seat control, AC, side window defroster system, power steering, and being the Brougham, those optional features seen on base models were standard. Under the hood was the Olds 350, which made around 170 horsepower. I believe for 1980, GM actually went down to a 307 that made less power, and then I think they went back to a 350 because these started to gain a reputation for being slow. To add, throughout the entire life of the 3rd gen Tornado, the Olds 350 diesel was an option. In all honesty, I think I'd rather have a 98 Regency coupe over the Tornado. I think they look more elegant and they're also a little bit more affordable. So I did just say there won't be any mention of the Eldorado. However, the 9th generation was a completely different car. Specifically, this entry goes to the 1978 Cadillac Eldorado Custom Barrettes. Like the Tornado and Riviera from this same generation, these were full-size personal luxury coupes. When people think of Cadillac during the 70s, these usually come to mind. Just a giant, luxurious coupe. I mean, these were as long as a modern-day Suburban. The Barrettes package was the top of the line treatment you could get. Sierra grain leather, pillow style seating, cabriolet roof treatment, special pinstriping, the works. But, and I just found this out, there was a limited classic Barrettes package that was only available for the 78 model year. This package alone was almost $2,500, making it more than a regular Barrettes. The main difference between the two was the two-tone interior and exterior paint, along with gold accent trim pieces. I find it funny how the ad says that these were easy to park thanks to its power steering, but that really isn't true. I'm sure it did help, but you could be turning the wheel and notice little to no change. My grandma had one of these back in the 80s. She told me when she made a turn, she would have to see if the rear made it safely. Next, we have the Cadillac DeVille with the Phaeton package, coming in at around $13,000. 1977 was Cadillac's 75th year anniversary, and I guess to celebrate this, the DeVille saw a nice refresh and the introduction of a more downsized and appropriate car for the times. I mean, these were still pretty freaking big, especially from a 2024 perspective. You would definitely notice a change come 1985 with the introduction of the 6th generation. Okay, so what was this Phaeton package? Well, you could option in with the coupes and the sedans. The sedans actually had a higher base price, and so that is what we will go with. with. This package was around $2,000, and with it you got special pinstriping, wire wheel discs, Phaeton script, special colored paint and vinyl top, leather upholstered seats, leather wrapped steering wheel, and of course, optional options came standard. But you did not get all of them. For instance, if you wanted to opt in for electronic fuel injection, that was around $750, and if you wanted the 350 Olds diesel, which hopefully you did not, that would have been around $800. There won't be any mention of the Buick Electra, Fleetwood Brougham, or Olds 98, as they all shared the same platform. I'm assuming that you can make any one of these cars be even more expensive. For example, opting in for the Park Avenue trim on the Buick and adding every option would probably make this car close in price with the base price Caddy.
Over 500 miles on one tank full of fuel. It's a diesel-powered 1980 Cadillac. That's Columbus, Ohio to New York City. That's Kansas City to Dallas, Texas. That's Los Angeles to the Grand Canyon.
We now move on to the only sports car on this list, the Corvette C3. These were produced from 1968 all the way until 1982, which makes it a pretty long production run. 1978 would mark the 25th year anniversary for the Corvette name, and that same year the C3 was chosen to pace the Indy 500. If you put 2 and 2 together, you have a special edition Corvette. With this Indy 500 edition, you got two-tone silver and black paint with red striping, fastback rear window like the C2, special front and rear spoiler, unique wheels, those awesome graphics, and the options would continue to the inside. The base engine in these was still the 185 horsepower 350 small block, paired with either a 4-speed manual or turbo hydromatic auto. Consumers could opt in for the L82, bumping power to 220, 0 to 60 in around 6.5 seconds. The original plan was to just build 2,500 units, 100 cars for each year of the Corvette's production since 1953. However, these became instantly popular among enthusiasts, and so GM agreed to sell more, totaling to around 6,500 units. The base price for the Corvette was around $9,400. With the Indy 500 package, the price jumped up to almost $14,000. And back to Cadillac we go with the 1979 Cadillac Seville Elegante. Base price for these was around $14,200, and with the Elegante package, that price jumped up to almost $17,000. The Seville was based on a stretched X-body platform with better build and ride quality than the other X-body cars. I would hope so for that crazy price tag. The Seville was Cadillac's answer to the rising popularity of the European imports, and was the smallest and most expensive model in their lineup. It was almost 1,000 pounds lighter than the full-size DeVille, which was previously talked about. Lincoln responded to this with the Versailles, which was super expensive as well, and Chrysler responded with the LeBaron. For 1978, a few years after the Seville's debut, Cadillac introduced the Elegante package, which was around $2,800. You got a unique black and silver paint tone. I believe in '79 there was also another two-tone paint scheme, perforated leather seats, real wire wheels, and a whole bunch of interior options such as power windows and door locks, cruise control, and this was pretty advanced for the time. Cadillac even offered the trip computer for the Eldorado in Seville, which was another $920. And don't get me wrong, this is super expensive, but again, also pretty advanced. It could tell you miles to empty, miles per gallon, and destination arrival time. I think these first-gen Sevilles look great, and many thought so too back in the day, with more than 50,000 units sold in the last 2 years. I'm sure some of you are wondering, where the heck is Lincoln? And to that, we'll move right on to the next entry. The Lincoln Continental Williamsburg Edition, which all in cost around $17,500. In 1970, Lincoln introduced the 5th Gen Continental. They featured a body-on-frame construction, but for the first time in its life, they no longer were given their own chassis, rather given a longer wheelbase version of the Marquis, and this was stretched 3 inches. The reason behind this was to save on costs, of course. In 1975, there was a substantial mid-cycle refresh to the Continental, and while most manufacturers were worried about downsizing, Ford did not care. And as it turns out, these were still fairly popular for many consumers, as they still wanted that full-size sedan. From 1977 to 1979, the last few years of these 5th gens, they received a bigger bumper, and with that, they were the longest automobiles ever produced by Ford. In regards to the Williamsburg Edition, it featured two-tone paint, full vinyl roof, pinstriping, comfort lounge seats, and standardized a number of options. The Collector Series was also pretty expensive. It may have been even more. These were to pay tribute to the end of this generation Continental before things would change. One of my favorites on this list is the Cadillac Fleetwood Series 75. These had a 151-inch wheelbase, making it 17 inches longer than the regular Fleetwood offered at the time. When looking at this car, it looks like a limo, and you're absolutely right. These were the only vehicles in America that were specifically designed and built as limousines. However, they could also be 9-passenger sedans. The only difference between the two was the addition of a division window. So this generation ran from 1971 until 1976 before these two were downsized. 1976 would be the final year, and buying one of these new would set you back around $15,000. I mean, these were absolutely loaded with options and luxury. One of the highlights of these was the fact that there was 2 separate automatic climate control systems, one for the driver and one for the passengers, and having this in any car for the time was not common whatsoever. Cadillac says these were a place for luxury and comfort, but also business. Only the top 1% could afford these, and finding one of them is super rare. Less than 2,000 were ever built. Our second most expensive American car goes to the Lincoln Continental Mark V. This was one of Lincoln's personal luxury coupes offered at the time, and was the largest two-door coupe produced by Ford. Again, I just talked about the Lincoln Continental, same thing applies here. Completely loaded with options, power everything, even during the late 70s. There were a couple of super high-priced additions. First, the Diamond Jubilee Edition in 1978 to mark Ford's 75th year anniversary. 1979 had a collector series just like the Continental mentioned before. And my favorite, the Designer Series, where consumers had the option to pick from Givenchy, Pucci, Cartier, and Bill Blass. Each had coordinated exterior paint, interior upholstery, trim, vinyl roof, and body side moldings. For 1979, Cartier was picked the most, followed up by Bill Blass, Givenchy, and lastly Pucci. I mean, these were works of art. The fine detail within the Mark V is stunning, but with a hefty cost. In today's money, any one of these trims could have easily exceeded $100,000. The collector series alone was $8,000 back in '77. One of the features offered for this edition was the addition of a leather-bound owner's manual and leather-wrapped toolkit. Personally, the Coupe de Ville and Eldorado honestly had nothing on this car. The Stutz Blackhawk was the most expensive American car built during the 70s, and if you have never heard of this car or the brand, I was in the same boat. Stutz was an American ultra-luxury manufacturer from 1971 to 1987, and over the course of those years, around 600 were built, and each year kind of had different ones. There can be like a limo, a sedan, convertible, and coupe. And the reason for such low production numbers is, well, for one, they were super expensive, and two, these were hand-built. And I think they look nice. Many celebrities had them in the past, but I mean, guys, this is an insane amount of money. Under the hood, there could have been anywhere from a 307 to 500, and a few years there was even a 429 Cobra jet engine. What I find funny is the fact that these were built on a Pontiac Grand Prix chassis up until 1980, when they switched on over to a Pontiac Bonneville chassis. They also had fake side exhaust pipes as well. But at the end of the day, these were ultra luxury. 24 karat gold plated trim, top notch leather, fine wool carpeting and headliner, power sunroof, power everything, cornering lights, real wood trim. However, when I look at those seats and I compare them to a Continental, they don't look nearly as comfortable, but the car was double the price. And there you have it, the top 10 most expensive American cars during the 1970s. Like I said earlier, you could option in so much with these cars, and quite frankly, the order could be mixed around a bit. With that said, I do sure hope you enjoyed this week's video, and I will see you guys all next week.